Welcome to another episode of Sustainable Goat. I'm Steve Cassingham, and I interview the greatest of all time in sustainability, from the past, present, and into the future. In this episode, we talk with Derek Hansen, CEO and founder of Mynt Systems. Mynt Systems is building what they call the new energy future, taking the mid-sized commercial real estate segment, which is traditionally the most dirty, and optimizing everything from the building structure and design to the use of energy to make these buildings truly sustainable and profitable. We talk deeply about a lot of concepts, from the challenges of entrepreneurship, power grids, and the future of how we store and distribute our energy. Derek's story is definitely one to listen to, as he is truly an amazing human. So let's dive right in. I figured let's just start with a little bit about your history and just, who you are. Where are you originally from, and kind of what's your story from when you were a little guy?
I grew up here in Santa Cruz, and I grew up in an entrepreneurial family where my dad had grown up in LA. I met my mom in LA, and she was originally from New York and had moved to LA in high school. And, so they lived the LA lifestyle for a while, but after, some time, they got kind of disillusioned with, the rat race kind of vibe that was going on around them. They were kind of hippies, beach bum hippies. And my dad's very much a free spirit. He was always kind of a business development sales guy. And so, he was kind of lived with the idea that, he could create his own future, his own income. And so he, getting kind of tired of LA, I was born down there. And so I was about a year old, and they had made some trips before I was born up the coast and had checked things out. And at the time, this is 1976. Santa Cruz was just this little sleepy beach town, really, not much going on. It was just a really cool, funky vibe that kind of fit their aesthetic, as these, free spirited kind of, coming out of the 60s hippies kind of, folks. And so, he bought a little fishing boat, bought a little house, decided that he was just going to, figure it out. And he started a business that was in aftermarket glazing technologies, basically coatings for glass that reduce solar heat gain and UV and things like that. Yeah, very interesting.
Was that a thing back then?
It was. Believe it or not, and I've told my dad this. At the time, it was this kind of resin based coating that you floated over the glass, and it dried, and it had this extremely effective kind of solar rejection properties. But if a fly landed on it while it was drying, the whole thing was bad, right? And so later on, these much more sophisticated technologies came out that were more of a laminate kind of thing. But he saw it as a niche, and he saw it as the story goes that he was downtown Santa Cruz, just kind of walking around, and he watched this guy doing it, and the guy was just blowing it, right? He was just messing everything up, and he goes, "Hey, you know what? I think I can help you. And, do you need a partner?" And so he partnered with this guy, and my dad, being a sales guy, went out and started developing the market with this guy as he learned the process and got better and better. And eventually bought the guy out and found his own new partner. And so I grew up around a business that was mom and pop, but niche, and based essentially on the fact that my dad could sell ice to Eskimos, right? And so I kind of grew up around that. Now, over time, the business matured and grew. So my story goes that I was, one of those kids that was certainly bright and, and interested in school, but just did not want to do the work, and would much rather be in conversation, with the teacher, sometimes to my own, detriment, and with other students, but just barely made it through school, to be honest with you. And I found in high school, I found art and architecture. I found out that I could get math credits for architectural drafting. And so I basically stopped taking math, which was not a big deal for me, but it was a way that I could do something creative and still make up the math credits. So I took architectural drafting every semester, all 4 years of high school. And I also found early on in high school, an art teacher who happened to be a student of a pretty famous artist, Diebenkorn, and he was his student, one of his star students, and he was a fairly well-known artist, internationally himself. And he kind of took me under his wing. He saw that I was probably one of those kids that was going to cut class more than go to class, and he said, "Hey, there's this little back room here to the art class, to the art classroom, that was not much bigger than a closet. But hey, if you're going to cut class for any reason, or you just need to get away for whatever, just come here. And, I'll talk to the other teachers, just show up here and you can paint. And so I spent, most of my high school career, in that back room painting. And eventually my senior year got an internship with one of the bigger architectural firms here in Santa Cruz, and then also got accepted to CCA, which is California Academy of Arts and Crafts up in San Francisco, which is kind of a fairly prestigious art school based on my portfolio, not on my grades. Long story short, parents couldn't afford the tuition at the time. It was an expensive school, and I didn't end up going. So went to community college, and essentially, having grown up around the entrepreneurial vibe, and seeing and having worked for my dad over summers and vacations and things, and made some money, I couldn't stand sitting in school anymore and not making money. So I dropped out and decided to move to Maui during the kind of the early housing boom over there, and started working construction. So I had studied architecture. I had worked for that architecture firm, and I had seen, kind of from the inside out at that architectural firm, which I thought I wanted to be an architect ultimately, that they're just it's not as creative as I thought it would be, right? They're kind of limited by client desire and code and all the other stuff. And so I said, I'm just going to go try my hand at construction. So I moved to Maui and started building houses with a firm that one of my best friends' father owned. Did that for about a year. Didn't own a car. Barely made rent. Lived off other people's stealing fruit off other people's fruit trees, and things like that. And had a great time. Just kind of living the surf bum lifestyle and working construction. And while I'm over there, my dad comes over for a visit. And we're down at the beach one day, we're body surfing, hanging out, and he goes, "Here, come here and sit down." And so I sit down next to him, we start talking. He goes, "Look, I've got a business. You're working for somebody else's company." And he goes, "I've got a company, and someday I've got to turn this over to somebody. And, how about you come work for me?" And so I saw the potential opportunity. And so I said yes, and I kind of packed everything up and came back home. The cool thing is that my dad, being the kind of old school guy that he is, he made me start at the very bottom and kind of work my way up over the years through every position. So by the time I got to a leadership role, I had worked every position in the company essentially. And so I ended up, after about 15 years in the role of CEO for that company. My dad was able to kind of step back, and I ran that company for I think 6-7 years as kind of CEO, and then in that process of being CEO, I was really trying to grow the company. What I had seen is that I had to grow the company if I was going to have the income I wanted and my parents were going to be able to retire. I was going to have to really grow the company. And so that was my goal. And at the time, the energy kind of market was kind of developing. And prior to that, it had been most of the energy, big, deep kind of sustainable work that was being done in government facilities, and maybe some kind of, class A campuses. But for the most part, it was just coming online as an investment strategy. And so I was working for ESCOs, what are known as ESCOs, energy services companies, which were spin-offs of, or arms of companies like Chevron. So Chevron Energy had their ESCO division, or Trane, which is an HVAC manufacturer, had their ESCO division, which was essentially doing energy audits and then designing programs that were going to holistically reduce energy consumption on these large scale facilities. In my case, they were big shopping malls, and most of them were down in Southern California. And so we were acting as a consultant on the glazing component, which they couldn't. That was kind of the nut they didn't know how to crack. They understood HVAC and they understood, lighting and all those kind of low-hanging fruit items, but glazing was kind of a mystifier for them, because all these shopping malls have this like long spine of skylight running down the middle. A lot of shopping malls have that. And these things are, we're talking about 1 million square feet, and this skylights that just run down the whole. So there was no way for them to truly optimize the cooling when there's that much solar heat gain coming right through the roof. And so we came in and helped develop programs for them that allowed them to truly kind of hit that number that they were looking for. In that process, I got to see kind of behind the curtain on how those companies worked, what they were doing right, what they were doing wrong, and I learned a lot in that process. And the kind of light bulb moment for me was, hey, this is going to become the new kind of future for not just class A campuses or, large shopping malls or government facilities. This has to move into mid-market commercial at some point. And so I did a bunch of research and found that there was really not a lot of companies doing that. Long story short, I had been trying to grow my parents' company into different areas, and it was kind of almost breaking their model, breaking the machine, so to speak. They weren't prepared for it. The company wasn't set up for it, and essentially my vision was bigger than what that company could handle. So I ultimately resigned, left it back into my brother had actually joined the company as well, left him kind of to help run things with my folks. I resigned, took, sold all the property that I had, sold a bunch of stuff, and kind of got a little nest egg. Literally sold the house my family lived in and moved up to rented a house up in the Santa Cruz Mountains and just hunkered down and wrote a business plan. Took a few months to write a business plan and start shopping for investors. And so ultimately, I did get the business plan written. As looking back at it, we have it saved because it's so funny how simplistic it is, but it was enough to capture the attention of a couple seed investors, kind of angels that came together to form a little bit of an investor kind of model for us. Very, very little capital, took a big chunk of the company, but got us enough to get us about 6 months of runway to get the company off the ground. Being kind of a business development guy, of course I grew up around that. That's who I am. I built my career basically on being a sales guy. I said, I can do this, right? So I recruited a couple partners, one of them being my wife. And, at the time we had 2 little babies that they were, 3 and 4, and somehow I convinced that, another buddy who was a general contractor. My intention was to be kind of vertically integrated and go out and actually deliver projects, is not just develop them, but deliver them. And we hit the ground running. And so, that's kind of what got us to where we're at now. But a lot of changes since then, of course. But that's the backstory on how I got to where I'm at now. Personally, I'm, obviously passionate about being a father. I love living in Central California. I think it's the hotbed of technology. I think that we're able to kind of prove a lot of new concepts in the market here in this area. It's a very ripe environment for that. I grew up surfing. I've been a passionate, practitioner of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for the last 15 years. I spend a lot of time coaching and mentoring young folks that are coming up in business. Some of them internal, in our company, and some of them just as people have come along and asked for mentorship. I really, really enjoy doing that. For me, it's very rewarding to give back the same way that somebody once gave to me. So.
Wow. And just thinking about in terms of like the school structure, you got to get good grades, you got to do this, you got to do that. And you've kind of proven in one way that passion and the willingness to do something that others aren't willing to do shows that you can make it.
First, let me start with this. It turns out, and I found out late in life, it's only a few years ago, that I'm dyslexic. And that answered a lot of questions around what I was struggling with in school. And I found out through a friend of mine that's a chief marketing officer for a couple of companies that went public. He's a very successful guy who's dyslexic. And, we were talking over dinner one night, and we were talking about something goofy, like how I still get lost in my own hometown driving around. I'll get kind of lost, and I'll have to ask my wife, wait, which way should I go here? And he starts asking me a series of questions. And, based on my answers, he goes, dude, you're dyslexic, man. Read this book. And he gives me this book called The Dyslexic Advantage. And it was truly eye-opening in that it talked about how a lot of the world-changing entrepreneurs are dyslexic. Going back in history, Leonardo da Vinci is known to be a dyslexic. Albert Einstein was dyslexic, all the way up through some of our most prolific, tech founders. A lot of them are dyslexic. It just essentially the definition has gone from being somebody that sees letters, transposed, which I don't at all, to somebody who learns a little bit differently, to now the broad definition is somebody that operates a little bit more in the right hemisphere than standard, right? We all use both hemispheres, but dyslexics tend to operate more from the right hemisphere, which is a little bit more of a creative kind of outside the box thinking. It's more language based. It's more, and less, rote memory and kind of logic based. And so reading this book, it opened my eyes to like, what are my superpowers for one? And wow, that now I understand my own history a little bit better. Back to what I was saying, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it was some, PhD, MIT professor talking about, some really brilliant concepts around genetic sequencing and, whatever it was. It was deep. And I'm listening to this, I'm fully engaged, I love it. And I listen to a lot of stuff like that, quantum physics, quantum mechanics, and it's all out there. The internet provides it either in, things you can read, the books that are available now, just at this, push of a button, as well as podcasts. And it dawned on me, like, I'm seriously considering telling my kids, hey, just get a really good through high school education, right? Like really pay attention, try to learn as much as you can. And then ultimately don't go in debt in going to university. Just build yourself a self-education program, which I'll help them with, right? I feel like you can tailor your education based on what's available out there. If you're a different kind of learner like I am, geez, you can get a college education, like they used to say, right out of the public library. Well, now it's just right out of the internet. It's on
Yeah.
podcasts or whatever. It's available. So I feel like our educational system really needs to shift and adapt, not only to different learning styles, but to the potential that we don't all have to sit in a classroom.
I mean, what do you think it was about architecture and art that really drew you to it originally? Was it the beauty of the building? Was it the shape of what you can make a skyline look like? I mean, what was that draw for you when you were a kid?
Oh man, that's a fantastic question. I'd tell you that I think first and foremost, all the above, right? But certainly it's the freedom and creativity. I was always a fan of, like many architects, of Frank Lloyd Wright, but I'm not a huge fan of his building. Like, I don't really passionately love his design. Like, that's not the case. It's that he was willing to take a current paradigm and completely shift it. Like, he was willing to go out on a limb and say, what you think it should be, it's not, right? It should be something else, and or it could be something else. And so I think it was the freedom of expression and creativity in and around hard, tangible objects, right? So for me, I wish I could spin the camera around. I've got some of my own art up in the walls here in my office, but that thing lives. It sits there. It's something that was creative, that had no boundaries, but it sits there and lives for however long it lasts, right? A building is the same thing. It can be the thinking around what our structures are like, how we inhabit the buildings that we're in, how they function for us, can all be rethought and reconsidered. And that's what I think was really, for me, I'm all about paradigm shift. If I really look with some introspect and say, like, what drives me, what motivates me, it's not really even the thing I'm doing, which is certainly I'm very committed to and is very important to society at this point. But it's more about shifting consciousness. It's more about shifting the paradigm of thinking around a given subject.
And did that feel kind of easy for you in a way? Like it's like, do you just kind of walk around and you're just like, wow, that should be shifted, that should be shifted. And at a certain point, like, part of the challenge when you're so creatively stimulated by the world around you, it can almost feel overwhelming because you're like, there's so many things that you can shift and fix and do, but eventually you kind of focus in on one of them. I just think that through your story, you kind of naturally fell into what you're doing, but you had a passion for it. Did you ever struggle with that? Like the idea of like so many things?
I can get passionate about a lot of things. There was a time where I had been, kind of recruited by a friend of mine who was starting a very large sales organization. And, so he, based on how I taught and the way I coached and some of my experience, he asked me to come lead some of these, coaching, essentially trainings for, like, hundreds of people. And I got really, really passionate on how to build a program that reached people where they were and helped turn people who had some intention to become a salesperson into really being good at it, based on some of the fundamental principles that I had developed over time. So I can become passionate about a lot of things. And I think that was one of the challenges I had in school. I remember literally sitting in school looking at the desk and going, God, this is a stupid design. It could be so much more functional if it was this, this, and this, right? And that's the kind of crap I'd be thinking about instead of listening to the teacher. Next thing you know, I'm getting kicked out of class and I'm in the hallway, but I think that does just occur. And I don't want to kind of bang on this drum too much, but that is part of what comes along with the dyslexic mind, is that ability to kind of see things from a different angle. And so, yeah, I would agree that certainly it is something that I do carry with me, is often looking at how things could be different or better. And I would argue that it's not always better that is better. It is different that is actually creating the better outcome or the more preferable outcome. Better just means an improvement on an existing thing. And that isn't the paradigm shift, right? Everybody's got a better hamburger. Well, who's going to come out with something that isn't the hamburger? You know what I mean? It's like, better is competition. And I feel like there's two mindsets that you can exist with. One is the competitive mindset, which is kind of operating from there's a finite amount of opportunity and we're all going to kind of fight over that or slice that pie. And the other is the creative mindset that just says that, let's build an oven and bake as many pies as we want, and I think that's the distinction there, that different is actually what we're after when we're talking about paradigm shift, as opposed to just better, because better is the same thing, just improved. And I'm saying a complete shift, right? So back to the idea of, what it is we do as a company, what it is that I've dedicated my life to at this point. I feel like it has some of the most meaning for the future of humanity. Us proving this model.
What's the story of the company? So you came up with a business plan, you got some funding to give you a little bit of runway, and now we actually have to make a name for ourselves. What did that look like?
So in a nutshell, we can go deeper into this, but just to give it context, in a nutshell, the idea was to take a vertically integrated approach to improving the energy performance of mid-market commercial and industrial real estate. The idea for me was that we have been screaming from the rooftops for 30 years about what we should do for the environment, what we should do to fix, carbon, emissions, like all of the things that we, how do we save the trees, the whales, the whole thing, right? Everybody's talking about what we should do. Not much had really been done. Not much was happening. The powers that be hadn't quite gotten on board like they have now. But the bigger issue was nobody had translated doing the right thing into making more money. And at the end of the day, we all want to do the right thing, but if it's a cost, it's way down the list on things we're going to do, right? But if it can be presented in a way that's an investment strategy that says, look, you invest this, you're going to get X in yield or a return. And certainly for mid-market commercial industrial, we realized that we couldn't aim our deals at the tenants. They're just paying rent. That's not their building. They're not going to invest in the infrastructure of that building for somebody else's building, right? So we decided we had to aim right at the ownership of the real estate as the buyer, and then translate what was tenant utility costs into new income for them on that real estate, right? So it's basically bundling and packaging an investment strategy for commercial owners.
Why the mid-market section?
Great question. Mid-market section was specifically chosen. I didn't realize how difficult it was going to be because I'd been selling in that environment with my previous company. Mid-market, because the way I saw it was the Class A campuses, the Googles and the, Bank of Americas or whatever you want to call it, right? That level was already kind of being targeted by some of those organizations that I'd already mentioned, those ESCO companies and the large scale solar cities and companies like that. They were already in that space. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, there was a lot of kind of noise and I guess information in the market around how to fix your house, how to build a house better, how to go retrofit your house, put in your LED lights, insulate better, put in the new double glazed windows, things like that. It was already kind of there, right? Besides the fact that it wasn't really juicy enough for me to go into residential. I had spent time in residential market before. I just wanted to get out of it, to be honest with you. I was tired of the high churn, kind of on deals. I wanted more substantial deals. And so I didn't want to go compete with the biggest, we're talking about very, very financially strong companies that already had huge marketing divisions, already had, fantastic technology suites. I didn't want to compete with them. I didn't want to go take the time to create enough of a business plan and strategy that I would go raise venture so that I could compete with them. I just didn't. I don't like commodity, as we've already covered. I'm more of the creative mindset that says, where is nobody? What is the most underserved segment of the market? Well, the most underserved segment of the market is mid-market commercial industrial. It also represents the largest swath of our real estate in the country, as well as the biggest chunk of deleterious performance, right? Like if we're talking about the dirtiest segment, it's that. And so I said, look, that's the blue ocean. And so going back to your kind of primary question, what was that like? It was brutal. I mean, I spent I knew that I had about 6 to 8 months of runway based on the capital we raised. I needed to get proof of concept before I could go to another round, or go back to the same guys for more. And so I worked my existing network, and I started just cold calling. And I was getting hung up on. I was getting, just kind of completely blown off. I had 2 little babies, or 2, 3 and 4, whatever they were. I had, a wife that, that was looking for me to, to like pull this off. Right. It was a tremendous amount of stress. And it was, our first office was like in this like basement area of this house that we were renting. And I mean, there was nights where I was almost going to sleep in tears, just because I wasn't getting the traction. Finally, I got some attention. I got some people to pay attention to what I was saying. Got a couple deals going. We just started getting that traction, and then we had some projects that we could kind of point to, and over time we just bootstrapped it. And so by the time we got through that first, kind of capital that we were given, we were already profitable, on a kind of a short-term basis, or at least cash flowing, I should say. And we continued to bootstrap, and we decided that that was the way we were going to go because our deals were working in the market. There was market feedback that was positive. We were gaining traction in the direction we wanted to go. We were developing more vendor relationships, more subcontractor relationships, and it was starting to work. And so fast forward 7 years, last 2 years, we've been on the top 20% of the Inc. 5000's fastest growing companies list. We are, looking to double probably next year just based on our pipeline. And we're going into, multiple states now, and it's just, it's kind of going bananas. It's hard to even keep up with. So grateful that we did push through that very difficult time. Still very challenging at this point, but finally it's like we built the company that we had dreamed we could, and it's kind of off to the races at this point.
Yeah, what's that like? I mean, first of all, congrats on that. I mean, that's not an easy thing to achieve. And I think for a lot of people, they assume where you're at is where it always was. And and I think that, it is a lot of stress. A lot of people, I think nowadays it's being an entrepreneur is considered an exciting thing, but it's not easy, and it's a lot more stress than just going to a job and coming home.
You are right, because that would be more stressful for me.
Yeah, right. Me too.
No, but no, I would agree though. It is something to where you just, as long as you can show up and do your job, you're going to get paid, right?
Hmm.
For me, it's not only at this point, was it many years of, first it was, can I make enough, make enough money to support the three of us. Then it was, can I, now we got to find an office. Now we got to hire people. Now I've got, some mouths to feed. Well, now, we've got 30 plus families that depend on us performing as a company for their existence, right? Their income.
Hmm.
And so it's a whole nother layer of stress. But that being said, it's pretty clear to me, and I've thought about this, like what you always ask yourself, what would happen if this thing blew up and I had to go, like,
Hmm.
I'm unemployable. There's just no way I'm not starting something else. Like I don't know that I could show up and just, be an employee. It's just not who I am.
Hmm.
So I agree with you that there's been a lot of buzz in the market due to a lot of social media guys about, how glitzy and great it is to be a founder or an entrepreneur, and then you've got the kind of the hustle kind of hucksters, they're just like, oh, if you just work hard enough, you can make it happen. I don't believe everybody's cut out for it, to be honest with you. I
Hmm.
just don't. I think that if you're listening to this or watching this, and you have an inclination to go out and try to start something, you got to really, really look deep inside yourself to know that you have to have an absolute massive appetite for risk. You've got to know how to, you've got to look back historically and say, where have I just doubled down on myself? Like, where have I fully gambled on myself and made it happen? And then three, am I really willing to do whatever it takes for the good of the organization above myself? Right. I
Hmm.
can't tell you in the early days how many times we didn't pay ourselves, so that we could make payroll, or, how many, my wife would tell you, how many vacations we had scheduled that I just had to cancel just because it was the wrong timing within the company and the business cycle. The things that you give up, but
Hmm.
there's also the things you gain. It's so rewarding to look around and say, this, not, I hate taking credit for it, but that I created this, right? Or that I was a part of creating this, or that I was the genesis of this thing that's become what it is. Um, and the fact that, hey, if I wanted to, in an hour, I could take off and go hang out with my kids if I wanted to, and
Hmm.
that's a unique thing. And I didn't always have that luxury, but that is
Hmm.
part of what comes along with the entrepreneurship. But it is certainly a kind of a no, it's this kind of novel, cool thing to be an entrepreneur. And it's all the way I came up. It's one of the grittiest things that you could possibly do.
Hmm.
Like that's what you do if you're a goofball like me that really isn't cut out for a normal 9 to 5, right? Like it's like kind of it's the opposite. It's a little bit like you better go find your own way or you're gonna fail. Like
Yeah.
that's what
Yeah, and what do you kind of do in those situations where you kind of feel like in that moment there aren't really options? I mean, because like I'm much like you in the fact that like if I went to go apply for a job, I'm unemployable because I've always run my own company, and you can't just go and they ask for your experience and they go, cool, you experienced your own company. You haven't worked for anybody. And it's like, I have a lot of experience, but that isn't how that works. What do you kind of do on that mindset side when things get really, really hard? Because there aren't a lot of other options, whereas a lot of people kind of have a little bit of a fallback.
Well, I mean, I think that's a super cool question. You're digging into some neat stuff here. So, thank you. I feel like one of the ingredients, and I think you have the same thing, just getting to know you a little bit over the last few weeks. You have to, I think, have a pretty optimistic viewpoint on the future, right? You have to see the fullness of the upside, right, or the potential of whatever it is you're doing. But you also, I think, for me at least, have to be constantly very, very aware of what worst case scenario looks like. Like you can't be Pollyannic. Like for me, I'm always looking at like what does worst case scenario look like right now? Like what would that look like, and how would I react, and what are some of the things I would do? And so being familiar with that, like always living in the clouds, like the vision and the potential, which you have to have if you're going to be an entrepreneur, not being familiar. And I think this is the mistake a lot of founders, entrepreneurs make, is they're not spending enough time focused on what does worst case scenario look like. Because the more friendly you can get with that, like the yogis, I study a lot of Eastern philosophy. The yogis used to say like, the only way to get to where death isn't what death is, what we think it is to be ultimately very familiar with it. Like to be very, very aware of that day, what that looks like. And then you get rid of the fear. So what happens when people are surprised when worst case scenario happens, they don't know how to react. They haven't actually walked themselves through that. They haven't visioned that. And so I spent a lot of time looking at that, like going, okay, this is worst case scenario, like real worst case scenario, right? And what would I do? Well, I'd live in my camper in the campground, and I'd start, calling my network, right? Or whatever that scenario was. The second thing that I think comes along with natural entrepreneurs is they are relationship people. We're people. We like to talk. We like to jam. Typically we are biz dev folks. We like to develop business. And so I think that for me, I always looked at like, who is my network? And when times got really tough, who could I call that I have a relationship with that I could work through some of this with? Like, what are some of my options? Is it capital guys? A lot of times it's not. There's a lot of times early in a business, nobody's giving you a freaking dime. You're a heavy risk. They don't want to give you anything, right? Banks aren't going to lend. We all know that. You have no credit, right? And by the way, I leveraged every bit of my personal credit to even for every all the cars, the company cars that we bought, they were all on my credit. All that stuff, right? So your credit's kind of shot, and you don't really have any corporate credit. And so it's more about like, who do I call that could help me stir up the next deal? Or who could I call that would say, here, this is how I see this working, right? And so I would say that if you aren't developing a really good professional network, don't think about going into business for yourself. Because that's I think a paramount kind of thing another thing people miss. So I think people miss spending enough time on worst case scenario. So yeah, people don't get, I think, acquainted enough to the worst case scenario. I think it's a positive thing to do. Spend time there at every stage, right? Like, and the one thing you can do is fool yourself, right? You get that little bit of early traction, like we're killing it. I did that a couple times, and you start thinking that it's always going to be that way. And I'm telling you, every 6 months to a year, the freaking rug gets yanked out from under you. And even to this day, I mean, now it's things like the rug. It used to be like, that one check that we needed to make payroll and rent for the office was
lost in the
right?
mail.
Yeah, whatever it was, right? And now it's more like things that are like governmental mandates, or utility cost, rate tariff changes, things like that affect us, where the rug just gets pulled up. And so I'm always looking at the future. What is worst case scenario? So it's not just now and then it gets easier. No, every stage of your business growth, look at like, what could happen? Like, what if this happened? What would we do? You become a better company or a better leader, I think, if you know way ahead of time when this or that could happen. I know what my plays are. And then ultimately build your network. Always build your network. And the way I always looked at that is, I didn't come up, our business was successful, but we didn't have a ton of money. I didn't come up with I wasn't around a lot of money. And my dad was actually more of it, even though he was a kind of biz dev guy and started his own company, he was still coming from a fairly scarcity mindset, right? So I grew up around that. I didn't like it much. And I always felt like if I started my own company someday, I would find out how to create value for guys and gals that had money, those folks out there that actually part of their business model was the deployment of capital. Go bring them value, and that becomes your network. Pretty soon,
Mm-hmm.
when you call, they go, "That's somebody calling with something good for me," right?
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of looking for what you can get, always be looking for what you can give, because
Oh,
that
I
law of reciprocity is freaking real, dude. And I don't know if some people call it karma, some people call it whatever. The thing is if you're looking to to give, you're always going to be receiving. In fact, you're opening that kind of channel for being able to receive. I think a lot of us could be receiving more. We're just not even open to it. And so you
mm-hmm.
open that channel by first seeking to how do I give? How do I serve? That was my prayer every morning for the last 10 years of my life has been, how do I serve today as many people as I possibly can? Like that's my mission, right? And so you got to find a vehicle to do that. And each of us has that intrinsic thing that we can create and do, whatever that is. Yours is different than mine. We found that there's some parallel in
Yeah.
what you do and versus what we do. A lot of overlap there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's critical, issues in society, but ultimately, I think that's the mindset you got to have.
I love that you touched on that. The idea of reciprocity and the idea of giving, not getting, because when you were discussing like building a network, I think oftentimes it's misunderstood as I'm going to build my network of people so that way I can get, higher up in life. And that's not the answer. It's how can I bring value to people? How can I help people? And that's what actually builds a genuine network. And I think it's so easy nowadays to just burn a network.
Facebook and Instagram, and then you've got, it's kind of like what I've seen, I think it's the younger generation specifically, is a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
this like, it's almost like collecting, it's almost like currency. Like how many
Mm-hmm.
people do I have in my network is
Yeah.
a currency. And when you're looking at people as a commodity, that's not a network at all. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about true relationships. I personally, and I say this a lot, I say it for our company business model, and I say it for myself as a human being. I would rather be a quarter inch wide and a mile deep than a mile wide and a quarter inch deep. And I
Mm-hmm.
think what's wrong with society in general today, but certainly I'm noticing a lot of the younger guys that join our company, and some of the younger entrepreneurs that I know, they are literally coached and trained by the social media hype machine out there to be
Mm-hmm.
a quarter inch deep and a mile wide. And that's, I
Mm-hmm.
think, the wrong philosophy personally. I'm not to say that it doesn't work if you're in some form of social, kind of marketing, right? Like that,
Mm-hmm.
that could be a good philosophy there. But for me, I think that relationships have to be true and deep. I have to know about your family and your business and your challenges and your dreams in order for us to work well together, and you vice versa with me, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how it works. If we do this kind of like light touch, yeah, we're connected on, I know him and whatever, and we expect that we're going to get value out of that, that's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I see that a lot when it comes to when you start doing either a bigger deal with a business, or you're doing anything that, really takes a lot of time. It's not just like a quick transaction. At the end of the day, it comes down to trust. I mean, I can't explain how many business deals that I've done where there's not a contract sent one way or the other. It's a, hey, I trust you and you trust me, and let's do this. And I think that art of that handshake, if you will, deal, is has died a little bit because there's not that genuine interest on either side to actually trust one another and know that, like, get to know each other. I mean, on a deep level.
And dude, this is an interesting concept, right? That I think a lot of people miss. A contract can be a thing that forces us into behaving in a way at which is fair, right?
Mm-hmm.
And dictates how we're going to behave.
Mm-hmm.
Or a contract can just be the documentation of our
Mm-hmm.
mutual understanding and agreement. It's just a way of
Mm-hmm.
documenting what we already just shook hands about. And
Right.
that's essentially the only way I'll do business, right? If we
Mm-hmm.
can't come to like a human to human, business to business agreement that we're very happy with, where we both feel, there's that old mantra, and some of my clients still say this. They go, deal's not done until nobody's happy, right? And that's an old kind of,
Mm-hmm.
everybody's got to give up something, right? Well, I say it's the opposite. It's like the deal's not done until everybody's happy, right?
Mm-hmm.
I won't do a deal unless it's win, win, win for everybody involved, and even beyond that, right? Secondary, tertiary, results of our deal is wins. And so I'm a firm believer that you get it all on the table, you have a conversation, human to human, and then it's documented on paper. And that's what the contract represents. Here's what we talked about. Here's what we agreed upon. Just a different mindset, different style. It's certainly not the fastest way to do business. And I'm, also feel like that's why lawyers are so expensive and prolific. I feel like that's why there's such a commoditized market, is because people are looking for speed and scale above depth and true meaning behind their work, and so it's just, I think it's just different philosophies, but
Yeah. Well, and how have you worked to really translate that into what you guys do? Because at least my experience in real estate is that a lot of its transactions do take a while, but it's more like a lot of the paperwork, but a lot of it's about scale and getting revenue and making changes. Like, how did you get into that market of like, let's make this a win for everybody? Because I think that was a big hurdle that you guys had to overcome.
yeah. So I think there's two parts to that question. The first part that I kind of want to address, the way that we found scale for us, or a version of scale, right? Instead of just what I would call a rifle approach to the market, which is, you just go after one deal to the next deal to the next deal, where you can grow an organization very successfully that way, but it's a lot of work and it's not necessarily very repeatable. And so what we realize is that instead of treating each customer like a project, like there's a customer and there's their project, and or there's that thing that we were going to do for them. Instead, we started looking for the type of clients that had lots and lots of real estate, so that we can kind of introduce the concept and do the quote unquote sale once, and then go repeat that across their portfolio. And so that's where we kind of got our real speed and growth, was just that kind of philosophy. Instead of, so we might approach a client or get a referral to a client and talk to them, and we would only be thinking about that one piece of property that we knew about, right? And we would kind of speak to that. And certainly when we're talking about, as you well know, commercial real estate ownership, they don't tell you much about their, they're not going to let you behind their veil ever, right? Like they hold their cards very close to their vest. So you're talking about that one property. Meanwhile, they're thinking about the 20 others, but they want to make sure you perform on this one before they even talk about the next one. Well, what we started doing is presenting with the assumption already that very few people own one piece of commercial real estate, right? Like if you own commercial real estate, you probably own a lot. And so we started taking those relationships and speaking to them on a portfolio-wide kind of concept, as opposed to that particular building. So that helped, right? And the other part of it for us was a little bit more of like, what it is we do that's so beneficial, both for our clients, but also across all of that long tail kind of layers of platform behind that. So essentially what we're doing is saying that if you own commercial real estate, you're in the energy game and you don't even know it yet, right? It's not necessarily, kind of on your scope of radar. And what's happened is the technology is available. The cost matrix is kind of come to a point where we can go look at a commercial building and redesign that building's infrastructure to become more energy efficient, meaning that tenant in that building is using less energy behind the meter. So that's a series of energy efficiency measures, right? Things that we've already mentioned: LED lighting, new glazing technologies, HVAC optimization, control systems, things like that. All pretty well known stuff at this point, but bundled together becomes very synergistically powerful. And then we're going to offset the remaining energy consumption with, solar power. And then we're going to bring in battery storage, which is now going to create a utility cost arbitrage where we're soaking up the excess energy that's on the grid in the middle of the day from all the solar that's been deployed, and then reuse that power when it's most expensive. And so it kind of creates this shaving of peaks of cost in your energy, because what most people don't realize is if you put solar on your building, you're not actually using that solar directly on that building, right? It's going back into the grid, and the utility company is giving you a value for the power you're putting on the grid. Well, what's happened over the last few years is there's massive deployment of solar, in the market. There's literally, in the middle of the day where solar produces its most of its power, there's more energy being put on the grid than needed. And so battery storage is becoming the actual true panacea to the grid and all the grid problems, where we can now create islanding where you are actually producing power on site and then storing it in your battery and then reusing it, or in a lot of cases, like I said, soaking up that excess renewable power that's being pumped on the grid all over, the local infrastructure, and then storing it and reusing it on that facility. So it's kind of this thing that's normalizing the grids, peaks and valleys. It's creating a more localized distributed energy model, and the economics for the investor of that system that we're designing and building are phenomenal. The rate of return on that investment is far greater than almost anything that you can find in the market, because there's so much juiciness in that, right? There's so much money left on the table when we're talking about the cost of power and all of the different rate tariffs and all. I mean, it just goes on and on. It's very sophisticated. But the point is that, I've had commercial real estate investors tell me, if this is real, what you're showing me, the returns on this project are greater than the returns I get on real estate itself, right? So we're basically a turbocharger to real estate investment model by using, this renewable energy kind of concept, right? Energy efficiency, renewable energy, stored energy, decentralized energy infrastructure. That was why I started the company. The kind of light bulb moment for me when I wanted to go create this company was, if we could get our hands on the lever of capital, right? If we could show capital that this is a strong investment strategy, all of the right stuff will get done, right? Like all of the greening of commercial real estate will happen as soon as we can show these guys that it's a strong investment strategy. So up until maybe, right around we started this company, it wasn't happening so much that way, at least not in the kind of the market space that we're talking about. Now you've got, firms like BlackRock, that are basically saying, we get it, and we're moving 100% to sustainable real estate. The nut has been cracked. It's wide open at this point. Like really, it's become, now the challenge is there's not enough companies like ours that actually understand how not only to do the economic engineering and pro formas and build that investment strategy, understand real estate metrics and cap rates and things like that, and understand tenancies and lease agreements and all of that goes into real estate, but also understand the energy engineering, and all of the utility side analysis, and then also have project management and construction to deliver the projects. There's very, very few companies like ours that do that, and I mean, there's probably only a handful out there. And I think there's more and more coming online every day. And there's a huge ancillary industry being built around, a lot of the technology that makes all this possible. In fact, a lot of the Class A stuff that I was talking about, those guys are literally just moving to a technology that does a lot of this without changing much of the equipment on the building, because those buildings are newer. They have modern equipment that's fairly efficient. It's more about monitoring, measuring, and kind of utilizing that equipment in a better way. So technology is coming a long way. I mean, a lot of things happening, but from the standpoint of a holistic, vertically integrated, change your real estate portfolio, it's a very novel thing at this point.
Wow. Yeah. And I think when you take all those different verticals that you guys are in, I mean, that does paint the full picture for a real estate investor. And at the end of the day, sometimes whenever you build a new building, there's a cost to that building, not just the raw cost of actually building it, but you have, from a sustainability mindset, there's an impact of getting the new materials, transporting the new materials, building it, and everything that goes into building a building, rather than taking something that's already built and optimizing it. And I think that you guys fit in each one of those segments. If they want to build new, they can. If they want to update, they can. Because I think the pandemic has proven so much of the shift in commercial real estate. I mean, you see shopping malls pretty much empty. You see a lot of these buildings are suddenly mostly empty. And I would imagine for a real estate investor, it's a little bit scary when they're like, well, my tenants are leaving. I still need to make a bottom line at the end of the day.
I mean, this is kind of the little behind the scenes secret of what's coming, right? There's a near future where your tenants leave and you're still making money on that real estate. Right? It's because you've created, in the California market, it's not quite there. The East Coast, there's some spots on the East Coast where this is happening, where honestly, you don't even need a tenant. Tenant's kind of the icing on the cake, in theory, right? In that you're actually site generating power, storing it, and then selling it back into at kind of a merchant, they're calling, a merchant market for energy. You're selling it back into the grid for a return that's, or for a rate that's enough to where you are making plenty of money on that real estate and you don't even have a tenant. We're working on deals where we're coming in and saying, look, we'll we'll come to your real estate with your tenant. We'll deploy all of this technology. We'll build this all. We'll take over your tenant's utility bills in a separate entity, and we'll write you a check as an owner. We'll bill your tenants and we'll write you a check. Or, in some cases, we do that same setup for the owner. And so at the end of the day, what happens is we hedge against some of the costs that cause tenants to leave in a bad economic environment, right? So what we're doing is stabilizing their utility costs, which is typically one of the most, hard to predict variable costs for a business. Certainly, and we focus a lot on industrial, in manufacturing, partially because that's where the biggest bang for your buck is. I mean, they're high energy users per square foot, high, energy use index, EUI. Also, what they have working against them is that the more that they produce, or the more shifts they add, or the bigger, the more equipment they bring in their facility, the more energy they're using. And so sometimes they're in a situation where it's kind of the law of diminishing returns, where the harder they work, the more they do, the less profit they make. And they don't know right away, but over time they start to see that. What happens when you can fix some of these utility costs in that environment, grow all you want, your utility cost is fixed. Now you have this massive escalator on net profit on your top line growth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen companies that we've worked with go bananas because of that. Like, they were able to predict their future better, because what most companies don't realize is how the utility is actually billing them on their usage. And so they're adding shifts or equipment or whatever. And all of these crazy charges are showing up on their bill for, peak demand charge, or peak load, or, time of use, and all these things that happen where they're like, we're not making any more money.
Yeah, why would we expand if we can make more profit if we're even smaller?
They just don't even know. It's like you can only be so good at so many things, right? You're good at, making microchip wafers, right? You're not good at, understanding utilities, which is in a completely, it's an ecosystem unto itself, utility, cost and charge. So that's a big deal so we've seen a number of our past clients actually say that in the midst of, tough times, that was one of the things that helped them succeed.
Wow.
So as a landlord or an owner, investor in real estate, you got to understand you're creating not only a stickier tenant, they're not going to go anywhere. They're paying less to be in your building than they would anywhere else. And two, you're de-risking them a little bit, that tenancy a little bit. And three, you're doing the right thing to help your tenant, and you're doing the right thing for the environment, and you're doing the right thing for your community, and it's highly profitable, right? So it's kind of that win-win-win that I was talking about, kind of becoming a little, a little bit of a cliche at this point, but people, planet, profit. Like, that's kind of the focus.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the baseline of our company, what we're trying to do. So it's, we could go down a long road of like all the crazy stuff that's going on out there, but there is a point where we think that there's going to be a massive shift. I mean, this real estate is a lot of it's going dark. But I think that there's going to be a shift in not only what's allowable from a zoning standpoint, but it's just a shift in who's using what space for what. I think it's actually a very exciting time. I forgive me, because there were a lot of businesses that went under, and I don't mean to gloss over that. It's a tragedy. I think things could have been handled differently, certainly for small businesses, small, medium businesses. I think they got hammered where, big multinational companies got everything they needed, and they didn't even really need what they got. Meanwhile, the kind of, the mom and pops and the medium, kind of scale businesses just got crushed. We got lucky. We kind of had a moment in time where we're in high demand regardless of COVID, and then certainly there was some PPP stuff that helped us through. But I mean, the amount of businesses that went under it's just sad. However, I'm one of those believers that, the old example, right? When MP3 players came out, overnight CD industry just went under, right? It was gone. All those jobs lost, all those companies gone, right? Well, where'd those people go? They went somewhere. They found new employment. I doubt, I don't know the stats, but there are always going to be things that shift. Again, it goes back to the start of our conversation. I believe in paradigm shift. I believe in being open-minded. You can look at something and say, this is just terrible, and, kind of fold it up and go, this is awful. Or you can say, what's the opportunity here? All these buildings have gone dark. Wow, that's scary. I don't think so. I think a lot of real estate investors are going, that's an opportunity. I certainly am. I'm looking at, I've got buildings right down the street from me that are dark right now that I'm going, I'm knocking on their door going, hey, do you want to sell? So we'll see. It's an interesting time.
Yeah. I think from one standpoint, it is, it's scary when stuff like this happens, when there's suddenly like an uncertainty in the market, but you're right. There's always opportunity. I mean, some of the greatest companies ever made come out of crises. And that's exactly what I think real estate is going through right now is, one, there's a housing shortage. Two, there's a issue in commercial real estate that it's shifting. That paradigm is shifting into what is the new model? How can you take a shopping mall and turn it either into a hotel or a co-working space or something different than what it has traditionally been? And there's so much opportunity right there for people to innovate. One of the things that I really want to dive into with you is the idea of decentralized energy, because I think that I can probably speak for most people that there's a little bit of fear around, like, okay, California's cutting off power in a lot of areas, Texas, whatever, everything that happened there, like, and then with everybody getting electric vehicles too, I'm even reading that now there's so much pressure on the electric grid that you may not be able to charge your vehicle. There's an energy issue. So I'd love to talk with you about just what do you see as kind of what that future is and what it can be.
Decentralize everything, first of all, is my mindset. We're talking about one of them. I want to say that I was reading the tea leaves, I had some brilliant, future insight, when we started this company, which there might have been a little bit of that, but I think we got lucky too. I did not understand when we started this company the environment that we'd be in here at year 7, right? I just did not understand how big a deal this would become. We knew that there was an issue around climate. We knew there was an issue around the cost of energy and how to help people make more money with their real estate, how to help tenants, pay less to be in those buildings. We knew that there was better technology to be deployed. I'm just a fan of efficiency, period, right? Like if there's a better way, I love electric cars just for that reason. It's just a far better way to make a vehicle go down the road. It just is, right? Burning this fuel and an engine that's got all these moving parts and all this stuff. Or you could just have an electric. I'm a fan of that, right? If there's better technology, let's use it. And so that was kind of my real driver, right? Like I saw an opportunity, but now this has become, let's just focus on California, right? Let's go smaller now. Let's just focus on what you and I both know really well. And that's the PG&E territory, which is kind of central Northern California. And PG&E is kind of in the spotlight for a lot of reasons, right? The grid is essentially failing. I forget how many years old it is that they say, but they try to keep up with it, but it's failing. I think a lot of people have no problem bashing PG&E, which I think there's a lot of reason for that. There's a lot of reason to do so, but you also have to look at what it is they're trying to, do. It's an incredibly difficult task. I think the task that they have both in managing this infrastructure and maintaining this infrastructure plus shareholder value is the real problem, real challenge, but we won't get into that. So what the challenge is currently is all the things you brilliantly brought up, right? I mean, we've got more and more energy use all the time, a lot of it for good reason. We're electrifying more of our homes, more of our buildings. We're certainly electrifying our transportation. We've got an old failing grid, and then we've got largely wildland, transmission lines, right? To where they're running right through forests and, rural areas. And we've got fires. So we've got kind of the perfect storm of issues. We've got drought, theoretically somewhat of a drought environment. I think that some of that might be, kind of overplayed, but a drought environment. We've got a lot of wildlands. We've got old infrastructure transmission lines. And now we've got power shutdowns as the answer to that, right? Like what happens when winds are high, power lines go down, start fires. We're losing, hundreds, if not thousands of homes in California every year. And the only answer that anybody's come up with is just start shutting down power.
Turn it off.
And that's really, kind of what else would you do if you were PG&E? Like, you want more lawsuits, you want, what do you do? I think they could take some of their profit and go start to maintain some of the infrastructure in a broader way. But, who am I to, I don't know what that looks like. So the answer that we have, as part of what we're bringing as a solution, or part of the solution, our component to it is that the real answer to all of this is microgrids. And so what microgrid is, in just very simple terms, and there's more sophistication to this, go look it up because I'm not going to take an hour to explain it. The microgrid is essentially saying that at any given time, you can cut the power that is coming from your utility company to your building and run on your own site generated power and stored energy. So it's basically a sophisticated software system that's running your solar and your battery to work together in conjunction to where you have a resilient or islanded mode where you aren't really working off the grid. Not everybody can do that, right? So the next phase is how to create decentralized community microgrid systems. So What we're working on is, first and foremost, bringing microgrids to large scale facilities. We're talking to some of the larger manufacturers in our area. We're talking to large municipalities with large, infrastructure and facilities, and building microgrids for them, which works great. They've got the footprint, they've got the energy, they've got the right transmission, just distribution lines coming, that are the right, amount of juice coming to the building to where we can actually do this. What happens to all the folks that can't, right? And there's a couple parts of this conversation. One is the folks that can't afford it. You might have a building or a home, and you just don't have the capital to do it. Or two, you don't have the right size, footprint, facility, rooftop, space, whatever it is. We're working with the local community choice aggregator, CCAs or CCEs as they're known, community choice energy, in our area, the kind of tri-county area of Monterey, San Benito County, Santa Cruz County, is called 3CE. And they're working on a program that's just been released, and we've been helping them kind of develop this program of a distributed network of stored energy facilities. So these would be 1 to 5 megawatt batteries that are being placed all over the place. And what they're doing is working not only to kind of balance the grid, but also when that public safety plan shutdown happens, that, high wind scenario somewhere up in the mountains that could cause a fire and they're shutting down power, but somehow it affects us here running our businesses. We'll be able to actually take a localized grid that isn't going to cause a fire and kind of start playing that energy across that localized grid. So that's decentralized energy. What it means is a combination of microgrid facilities that have the ability to be resilient, and then also funnel excess power back into the grid when needed. And then a lot of these, everybody listening, the truth is the future around stabilizing the grid and renewable energy is in battery storage. Just get with that. Like, there's more than enough solar out there. Solar is not going to stop, but solar doesn't fix anything. It's just pumping more power back on the grid that then the utility company kind of shares and, distributes. There's a lot of conversation around the idea that it's not an equitable thing, and that the poorer people that can't afford solar are actually subsidizing the rich people who can't afford solar by the way that the utility companies caught. And so there's some changes coming around how much value they're going to give for your solar. So again, adding battery storage to every solar project is a key. People are doing that with their homes. And the bigger play is really about working with these community choice aggregators, which essentially their function and goal is to provide clean energy to whoever wants it in their region. So most of the state now has a CCA that's doing that, to where you can check your little box on your bill saying, I want clean energy only. To date, when they don't have that supply available, they're buying from solar farms out of state and having to, deliver that to your local area. It's not very effective. It doesn't work well economically. So the big push now, distributed energy, to concisely answer your question, is a distributed network of site generated power as well as site stored power that can work for the site that power is sitting, that stored energy is sitting on, but also can be used ahead of the meter and distributed around the regional network or grid. And what that does is it keeps costs lower for everybody that's buying energy. It helps fix the grid for the utility. So we might have one area up in the Sierras that's going to cause a fire, and they shut down the grid, and it can have a deleterious effect across a lot of different communities. Here, what we're saying is, like, a good example is our office is right at the end of the distribution line that runs all the way up into the Santa Cruz Mountains, up by past UCSC and up into the Empire Grade area. So if there's ever a planned shutdown up there, we lose power. The guys right across the street from us don't. Literally across the street, they're running. We don't have power. Well, we've built our own microgrid here at our offices now, so that's not an issue. They shut down power. We don't even know power got shut down. We just keep running. So that's kind of the future, is this distributed network of these islanded power sources that are all clean energy generated, solar generated power that's being stored in batteries, and then being able to be deployed through very, very sophisticated network of software that helps us all, and I think is an equitable way to help the community for a number of reasons. If you're the ice cream shop and power goes down, you've got a whole lot of product that's getting thrown away pretty quickly. You've not only not serving your customers, but you're throwing away product that you
losing a lot of money.
Yeah. So again, it's a massive, and now we're looking at emerging markets, places that normally wouldn't be a bankable or investable market. But if you can build community microgrids in those environments, they now become an investable kind of emerging market, parts of Africa and, different areas where all of a sudden we're kind of getting ahead of what are issues here for us in California, and going, what will they be experiencing in 5-10 years of continued growth in that market? Let's bring in this technology now.
So what does that look like, though, in terms for the utility companies? Because, you think you want it to be a win-win-win, but at the end of the day, if you have distributed microgrids, it either is or isn't owned by PG&E in this case, or it's owned by a neighborhood. What does that look like in terms of, I guess, like control that the companies have traditionally had in terms of energy and for profits and for shareholders and all that kind of stuff?
I'm going to speak to this. There's a limit to what I can be an expert on, right? Which is
Mm-hmm.
very little. But I'm going to kind of talk about this, but don't take this as like, I actually know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you what I think. So what's happening, and an example, and again, I'm not sure what your listener base is because I keep referring to our local area, and it's just because it's easy for me because it's top of mind. But if people are across the country, we have a local, what was a kind of a fairly large scale power plant that was PG&E owned that recently got shut down, and they shut down last year just because it was what they would call kind of more of an ancillary power plant. What they call peaker plants. They only fire them up when there's a need for excess power on the grid. They've got their kind of the largest scale power plants. They're running all the time, and then as the grid needs more power, they fire up these peaker plants. Well, they're extremely dirty, because it's just not a clean way to run, if you're going on and offline. Typically they're kind of an older functioning, technology. And three, they're just expensive. It's just not easy for the utility to do that. So recently they shut this one down in Moss Landing last year, which is, kind of in between Santa Cruz and Monterey. You and I grew up.
Wait, that huge one.
Yeah, seeing the smoke.
They shut that down?
Yeah, seeing the smoke come out of the smokestacks.
Yeah.
Yeah, they shut that down, and now they've got the largest battery storage deployment in I think in the world. I could be wrong. It could be the United States, but of batteries, Tesla batteries, and those Tesla batteries are functioning now as the peaker plant. So they're sitting right on the same site. We've got this giant infrastructure of this power plant. And then right there, maybe 2 acres worth of land is this whole stack of massive, stack of Tesla batteries. And so those are functioning as the peaker plant now. And they're not I don't think I think the utility is buying the power from that, but they don't own it. Right.
Right.
So my belief is the future looks like for the utilities that they're going to be paid what they should do best, which is maintain the infrastructure that delivers the power across the grid.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the California ISO that manages the California grid at large, making sure that everything's kind of in fluxing and flowing the way it should. Mm-hmm. But in PG&E territory, keep those lines good. Go rebuild the infrastructure. And so what they should get paid for is distribution, not generation. Right. So right now on your bill, you're paying for generation. You're paying for their power plants to run, and they're charging you what they need to charge you to make a margin on that cost of producing that power and running that facility. On your bill, you're also getting a charge for distribution, meaning the lines that carries that power. So my belief is over time, the utility is going to get pushed more and more into, I think one of two things is going to happen. Either the state is going to start looking at becoming a partner or taking over utilities. And I guess by the way, I'm totally speaking out of turn. I have no idea if that's plausible or what we look like. Mm-hmm. Or more likely, we're going to see more and more of these peaker facilities taking over the generation, right? So we've got large solar farms that are feeding the energy into these battery storage facilities that then are deploying the power as needed into the grid. And that the utility company is going to make their money just in the distribution, just maintaining that grid and charging for the lines being. Again, there are people that are absolute experts in all of that and what that looks like moving forward, probably have a far better, thesis than I do on that. But that's just kind of the way I see it and what I know. I try to keep up on all that, but the problem we're trying to solve on the regional level is big enough.
Well, and what does that look like for battery storage? Because when you think about battery storage, eventually that battery won't be able to store power anymore, and you have a whole disposal process to actually get rid of battery, and that of course has an environmental impact as well. I think that sometimes when we come up with new ideas, we don't necessarily think about the long-term implications. What does that look like in terms of battery storage?
I was just thinking about this morning. I woke up, I was just kind of laying there thinking about things. And I was, one of the things I was thinking about is how there's this concept that we all need to kind of consider, right? Is that at any given moment in time, we can look back in history and say, that was freaking wrong. That was wrong. And now we're doing it right. Guarantee you in a certain point in the near future, we're going to look back and say, we were doing it wrong and this is right. And So the idea that we all need to remember is nothing ever happens that way. Only thing ever
Mhm.
is happening is there's an evolution. It's there's a concept out there, a kind of philosophy out there called spiral dynamics, and it speaks to the idea that you transcend and include, right? You learn from the past, include what you learned, and then transcend it into the next phase, right? But what we're doing right now is not perfect at all, but it's
Mhm.
all we know how to do, right? Like it's
Yep.
the best we can do right now.
Mhm.
So to answer your question, currently there's better and better chemistry coming out for batteries, right? There are batteries that are very, very large that have almost zero deleterious waste, and they're called flow batteries, and it's just kind of a liquid. Some of the lithium batteries are worse than the nickel cadmium, that are coming out now, right? So we're always improving.
Mhm.
But what I like more than that for like the current time that we're in here is that we're starting to say that at a certain point that the battery's life has degraded, the battery's degradation has come to a certain point. Let's just call it 80% of what maximum was,
Mhm.
which currently takes something like 15 years, depending on the technology or the chemistry. You're going to get a degradation that gets you down to somewhere, some number, right? Well,
Mhm.
one of the theorems out there, one of the things that's being postulated, and I think some companies are actually starting to do this, is to say, why not repower that facility that has all that demand and all that capital behind it, repower that battery to 100%, take the old kind of degraded batteries and then go use them in low power situations. So take them and now
Mhm.
add another 15 years of life or 20 years of life by putting them in an electric bicycle or whatever.
Yeah, further the life of the actual product. Yeah.
Yeah. So because when you go to a low power use, the thing's going to last a lot longer. Now, cycles matter a lot. How many cycles is
Mhm.
that battery going through a day? But there's basically what they're saying. There's a second life market. There's a third life market, and let's
Mhm.
identify what those technologies are, those markets are, and start, instead of just running that battery into the ground and then having to throw it in the dump. Let's go continue. Let's extend the life of that battery through the deployment through different levels of technology, right? That's a big problem, to solve. That's a very kind of sophisticated, hairy kind of thing, but it is something very important to everybody, because the last thing we want to do is repeat the sins of the past, where we just
Mhm.
keep producing more and more shit that just screws up the world, right? So we're fixing today's
Mhm.
energy problem, thinking, oh, look at us, we're saving the whales and the trees and the redwoods, but meanwhile we're totally continuing to blow up the planet. So I think that we're starting to get better at that. And again, it's not my area of expertise. I certainly understand how to build markets, in mid market commercial industrial real estate, and use the technology that we have available to do that. But some of these long tail issues, I know that
Mhm.
there are a lot of good thinking going into it, and I do think that parallel paths are better and better technology that's cleaner and cleaner. And then at the
Mhm.
same time, what are we doing with the unclean technology to keep it from going into landfills?
Yeah, and most of it, I mean, when you talk to innovation, it's hindsight's always 2020. You're always like, "Oh man, we should have done this, we should have done that." But yeah, I think life cycle is a very important thing to think about, is how can we elongate it?
I was just in Healdsburg with my wife having a little weekend getaway together, and we were walking by an antique shop, and I saw one of those old school, like really old school bicycles with a giant front wheel and the tiny little
Yeah.
back wheel, and the
Yes.
pedals are like direct drive to that giant front wheel that actually is what you have to turn to steer. So first of all, you like can't keep pedaling while you're turning, right? And you can't get on and off the bike very easy because your seat's like 8 feet in the air. And I'm like, what the hell is that? Like, how is that a good idea? When you look at a bike now, you're like,
Mhm.
what are you thinking? But that's just an example of like how like single-mindedly focused we are on solving the problem ahead of us. Like, I want two-wheel locomotion. Like, I want a human powered thing that goes down the road on two wheels, and that's all that came to that guy's head at the into his head at the time. And any kid right now, if you ask them to design a bike, would design a bike better than that. You know what I mean? But
Mhm.
it's just the way it works. It's crazy. It was one of those
Yeah.
moments where I was like, good Lord, like, look at us. We're just monkeys with, really, at the end of the day, we're really not that advanced. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's a process, and we're constantly trying to innovate, and I'm sure in 50 years we'll look back and be like, what were we doing at that time with the technology that's, current in 50 years?
We'll have indefinite cold fusion, like the size of a can of beans that
Yeah.
fuels life. You know what I mean?
Literally. So, what does it look like for, I mean, I guess like the future of sustainability, especially for you guys in the industrial market? I mean, there's more stuff getting produced every day. There's a lot of manufacturing that's going on, I think, at a faster rate than it used to be manufactured. So what does that look like for, I mean, not only your business, but in terms of making manufacturing as clean as possible?
Well, I mean, future sustainability. For one, sustainability is becoming kind of a must-have instead of a like to have. On a number of fronts, right? We've got a lot of governance, ESG around,
Mm-hmm.
just what that looks like. Everybody who's at the larger scale in the marketplace has some level of governance around sustainability, and I think that more and more of your average homeowner is recognizing that sustainability actually is a cost savings, right? That's a huge shift just in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Used to be that, like, well, yeah, do the right thing for the environment or for the planet. It costs more, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to prove that model myself. I had the privilege to be able to kind of build my own home recently, and I said, I want to not only build my own home in the greenest way possible, but also as a microgrid too, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
fully resilient. Power gets shut down. We live up in the Santa Cruz Mountains. The power gets shut down. We don't even know it happened, right? Until we looked across the street and see, the neighbor down the road that doesn't have lights on, but we wanted beyond that to prove that it was actually more economic. And so a fully electric house, there's no gas running to our place at all. And we built at a lower per square foot cost than, like, well below average. And it's a very modern, nice home, and done with all of the right technology. And so it was kind of just proof of concept for myself that I was, kind of walking the talk, and that I could be an example of what I preach. That now, not everybody's out building their own new home, right?
Mm-hmm.
But certainly working towards a more sustainable environment, both in your business and your home, actually does have a return on investment. You just have to be willing to do it. There's a lot of funding mechanisms, so it doesn't have to be your own capital anymore. So I think that there's it doesn't take a lot of research on the internet to find some of these, whether it's a residential kind of program or certainly at the commercial level. There's a lot of companies like us that can bring the capital needed to the project. So the future sustainability for me, though, like what I'm like really focused on is distributed energy networks, right? These regional kind of islanded, or you might have an industrial park. Another example that can be a total islanded. It's still it's still running, it's still producing the food that we eat. I'm a big fan of like food production facilities where, if you look at what worst case scenario looks like for our society, it's grid failure and then no food, right?
Yep.
Where now all of a sudden, we have become people that have moved closer and closer to, these centers, city centers, where we don't grow our own food. We don't, and the food that we do grow typically at the commercial level is not really edible. It's typically for some other animal or something, or some other use type. And so at the end of the day, I think that's worst case scenario for society is you've got grid failures that are causing food shortages, and now you got a real freaking problem, because now you have some chaos in the streets, right? You're talking about turning normal people into thieves and and murderers, right? Like that's a really bad thing. So because you're going to do whatever it takes to feed your kid. That's just the bottom line.
Survival.
Yeah. So that's something we don't want to see. And so I'm a big fan of the idea that we just did a project for Beckman's Bakery. If you're from Santa Cruz, you know Beckman's, right?
So good.
Yeah, and they make some of the best sourdough ever. Their sliced sourdough is amazing. And shout out to Beckman's.
Yeah,
And
shout out to Beckman's.
outside the area, if you're outside the area, you're you may have heard of Beckman's. Their bread goes all over the place. So we just did a project where we rebuilt an old cold storage facility. You talked about buildings going dark, empty cold storage. It was just a big refrigeration facility. We rebuilt that into their new manufacturing facility, bread making facility, which is massive. It's 50,000 square feet of essentially industrial food production. But at the same time, we wanted to make them resilient. We wanted to, give them an opportunity to at least stay running, or reduce some of their ops costs, and so we cover that thing in solar. They're basically offsetting almost 100% of their, right around 90% of their power consumption with with site generated power, solar. And now we're working with the local, one of the sites that we've identified that we want to drop one of these batteries in that will feed the grid, but also back that facility up when needed, is Beckman's. So there's a point at which they'll be able to keep pumping out bread, even if there's a shutdown at the grid level. So outside of that, I believe strongly that America needs to bring manufacturing back on shore. I think that was one of the biggest mistakes we've ever made.
Hmm.
I get that part of the rationale was that it was dirty, low pay, dirty facilities, literally not good for the environment, low paying, hardworking jobs, not really what America wanted to become. We went into tech, we went into finance, we became this kind of superpower in that kind of
Hmm.
concept. But I think that it's now looking 30 years later, we're realizing that wasn't the smartest move. So what I like to call it the new blue collar is green, right? The new green collar, which is either working in the sector that we're in, like getting jobs at companies like ours, or in the solar industry, or becoming an electrician that can like actually learn how to do some of these battery tie-ins and things like that, right? And all of the kind of secondary, tertiary jobs behind that, distribution of these technologies, whatever. But also that you could go to work now in a modern American factory that's a microgrid facility, super clean, fully electric, whatever it is, and actually get paid as much as the guy that's got an engineering degree. Because right now there's a shortage of skilled labor in all fields that require it: construction, manufacturing. Those people now, and now what used to just be a job on the factory floor, pushing buttons, pulling levers, and mopping and whatever, is now actually more of a high tech process, right? If you look at a modern manufacturing facility, it's highly skilled labor. Those guys get
Hmm.
paid well. Those gals get paid well, and some of them actually have engineering degrees that are working on that floor, right? And so when you've got a facility that you can make a green, not only is a facility that's producing the goods that we use here domestically, a green facility, meaning it's not, the carbon footprint is very, very low. It also can serve as a hub because it's a high power use facility, meaning it's got good
Hmm.
distribution lines running to it. That can be a node, a liquid node for energy being distributed across our local community, right? So
Hmm.
that's what we're talking about, a decentralized energy. What we call, if you go to our website, we're calling it the new energy future. And we're talking about all of this, right? So not only are we making, and here's the next level to this, why don't we have manufacturing in the United States? Well, we can't compete with China,
Hmm.
India, Taiwan. We can't. It's too expensive here. Yeah,
Yeah.
but if you get rid of the cost of or if you
The
really
manufacturing cost.
on the cost, that's a big ops cost for those guys. We have a manufacturer that we did a work for in Fremont, a massive manufacturer of chip prototypes, and they told us that they actually have been able to now compete with overseas pricing because of the project we brought to them, which was over a megawatt of
Wow.
solar power, and now the next phase is bringing a large scale battery. So it matters. It works. What we're
Hmm.
talking about is a new energy future for America that works. We're trying to prove that model. We've been asked, are you going to scale nationally? Maybe, but that's not really what I set out to do. What my goal is to, again, quarter inch wide,
Paradigm shift.
right, is to prove the model in the richest, most effective environment possible, which is the Silicon Valley kind of Bay Area that we're in,
Mhm.
where we've got all the right ingredients to make it happen so that we can prove what's possible for the rest of the country.
Yeah.
So that
And
is,
and
that's a viewpoint from my viewpoint just being shared there. I'm a big, I'm very bullish on bringing, that blue collar manufacturing job back in the right way.
Mhm.
And I'm a big fan of companies that are willing to stay on shore, willing to pay into the tax base, willing to participate in that thing that was once what made America strong, was the fact that we produced a lot of the goods that we used here, and then we actually had good enough stuff to send overseas. So how do we
Mhm.
do that? We got to start changing that cost profile, right? That ops cost, and we got to love what we're doing here. So green
Mhm.
facilities, we can't have these crazy dirty facilities all over the place. We're not open to that anymore. So that's my answer there. It's like creating these super cool facilities, whatever they are, that are not only green but are a liquid nodal point for distributed energy, across the network.
I think that's great. I mean, and at the end of the day, to be able to distribute goods, when you have to put it on a ship and send it overseas, that not only costs money, but it also has an impact as well.
And it's
Um,
not long before that thing being shipped to your doorstep is coming on an electric truck, right?
yeah.
It,
Mhm.
it, it went from the distribution center to distribution center and an electric, semi truck, right? So
Mhm.
I feel like if I do think with the current administration that future could be viable.
Mhm.
It's going to happen organically no matter what, but I think it could be expedited with the kind of current thinking that we have.
Right. You basically incentivize the businesses that it's a financial advantage to be able to make that transition. And sure, it might be a little bit hard to do initially. It's a little bit more of a capital cost, but we'll help you out with that. But long term, it'll have a better impact, bigger business for you and a better network for everybody else and more jobs at the end of the day. Because I think manufacturing is something that I think everybody's starting to feel now. I think for a while, people who were in manufacturing, people who were in any type of these businesses, like you saw the wave coming. But now I think when people aren't getting their refrigerators or they're not getting their electric cars or they're not getting their cell phones because there's a chip shortage, now they're going, oh man, why don't we have them here? Hedging the fact that like we wouldn't have to and that it would just all work itself out. And I think now people are starting to figure out we gotta kind of make those moves on our own.
Yeah, I mean, it's even stuff that we don't even think about. Like we just had a conversation with Martinelli's. You know, what I didn't realize is they're the largest, I believe I read that they're the largest producer of apple juice globally. Like they literally pump out more
Globally.
than anybody else, right? And I think that I read that, and don't quote me on it. But the point is, that's a massive enterprise. It's been around a long, long time. I think since like
Mm-hmm.
1908 or something, right?
Hey, if you don't want champagne on New Year's, you get Martinelli's.
Yeah, man. Or when you're a kid, like I used to love
Yeah.
drinking champagne on New Year's. I got my Martinelli's sparkling apple juice.
Yes.
The best, you know, and you forget too. You go through the grocery store and you see those little, you know, round apple juice little things that look kind of like an apple. That's all Martinelli's.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, we just had a conversation with them. You know, their CEO is very, very interested in the idea of how to turn that facility into a microgrid, how to get away from the fact that either rising costs of power are affecting them and their bottom line, and also the power shutdowns that are occurring in our area, which will happen. You know, brownouts are happening for different reasons all over the country. What we just saw in Texas, it had nothing to do with,
Mm-hmm.
you know, California or fires. I mean, it's just a total failure, right? And so this awareness is occurring, and so you know they're going, hey, how do we, you know, let's do this here. So it's becoming something that is actually what was just kind of a pipe dream just a few years ago is now a reality, right? And I think,
Mm-hmm.
you know, based on Moore's law, you know, of just how quickly technology evolves, I think somebody I read somewhere recently that we're even outpacing Moore's law on technology. And if you don't know,
Really?
yeah,
Wow.
you know, and I forget what the equation is there for Moore's law, but essentially it's just the speed at which technology evolves. What we're going to see in the next 2 to 3 years is mind blowing. It's
Mm-hmm.
game changing, and what we want to do is kind of ripen the environment, ripen people's, you know, consciousness and thinking around what's possible, because
Mm-hmm.
we're kind of at a moment in time where almost anything is possible. Private companies going into space. We've got, I mean, it's just crazy what's going on. And so, you know, open, if we're all open to the idea of what can we do, and I think we want to bring this part of California as kind of a real proof of concept, then California at large, and then eventually the country at what's possible for this country to become kind of a more of a beacon, like we used to be a beacon of like the right way to do things.
Mm-hmm.
I think that blockchain technology, you and I were talking about this the other day. I think blockchain
Yeah.
and crypto are really going to change. I mean, blockchain more than anything is going to change the way commerce is done, and it's going to open the door for a lot more free exchange of things like energy. I mean, we've
Mm-hmm.
got one of our guys on staff is like a literal genius, and he's working on the application of blockchain with distributed energy networks and like how that's going to work, getting ahead of when that day comes that we can actually deploy in that manner.
Yeah, when the blockchain highway is fast enough where you can actually process all of that.
Yeah. So I mean, you know, it's bananas. But I think I'm very. I know it's a tough time for a lot of people. We just came out of one of the toughest times I think globally. You know, for many years. I don't want to kind of be that guy that's like partying while everybody else is crying. You know, I'm not doing that. I'm just saying be optimistic. You know, because we
Mm-hmm.
did come through a tough time, but you said it earlier. Sometimes the toughest of times are what creates the biggest opportunity or the biggest breakthrough. Breakdown usually equals breakthrough. And
Yeah.
I think we're seeing that right now with the way things are headed. I really have a lot of hope for the future. There's a lot of
Yeah.
bad shit going on in the world, but like I really have a lot of hope for the future based on this convergence of technology and mindset. Tech was kind of a blunt instrument, you know, for the last 20 years, you know, where
Mm-hmm.
unless you were in it, you didn't really get it. And you use this periphery, you know, we knew how to use email and our cell phones and stuff, but like really didn't understand what tech was doing. Well, now you got freaking, you know, 14-year-old kids amassing wealth through freaking blockchain. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's, you know, through crypto. It's like we're just on the precipice of a very interesting time.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. It's a very, very exciting time in so many different sectors too. And material space is changing, tech space is changing, food creation is changing. And I say creation because people are learning how to actually grow food in completely different ways. Because food is also a global issue that people are facing. And there's just so much innovation in so many different areas that Yeah, we're in a really exciting time, and the coolest part is we all as humans have the opportunity to change that narrative. And I think now is even easier than ever to get an idea out there. But at the end of the day, it's going to take that hard work to actually get there. It's going to take that dedication and the passion to want to change and shift that paradigm.
You know what's interesting is that's one of the thoughts I've had recently is, the new thing, the new skill that I actually was telling my kids this the other day. There was a time where getting to information was difficult, right? Finding information was the challenge, right? Like only the elites actually had the real science or information, right? Then we moved into like the information age, and then it was like kind of a little bit of like understanding the information, getting good at searching for the information, knowing that it was there. I think the new skill set that's going to be required is discernment. I think we actually are in such, there's such a mass of, literally all the information in the world ever amassed is at our fingertips. A 5-year-old can get to it, basically, right? So what does that mean? We have to get good at discerning what we're looking for, what's right, what's not right, truth versus fiction, falsity, and that skill set is one that's difficult to develop, right? It's like, how do you develop discernment? How do you define, do I believe this story versus that, or what is the real truth here? What's the real science behind this? We're in like a dark ages almost of this new wave of information where you've got people literally believing a completely different narrative than 50% of the population, right? Literally believe something totally different exists or is the reality. It's bizarre, right? So I think that that's going to eventually evolve, and but part of what that is discernment. I think we need to remember that as individuals. But it kind of leads me to discernment, meaning not just in information, but in how you choose what you use. And I think that I've kind of heard you say it a few times. And I think you're really big on this, which is supply chain. Not just supply chain kind of understanding, but like how clean is that when you're looking at that, from inception to use, like how did that thing come to be and how dirty is it? I think that's a way bigger issue, and there's a lot of people working on it, but I think it's a way bigger. You brought up something, a simple concept, right? I can buy it here for a couple bucks more, or I could buy it from China, but I'm not taking into consideration all of the things that are happening in a negative way to get it from China to here, right? Not only is the labor being mistreated there, potentially, I'm not saying for sure, but could be very well be, but all of the deleterious effects to the environment and sending a cargo ship all the way to the United States for the very thing that could have been produced here, right? That's just one stupid, simple example. But I'd love to hear more from you, like on what is, like, you've obviously delved into that from like a material generation standpoint, like what does that look like, and will blockchain enable us to understand that life cycle analysis of that material?
Yeah, I mean, I think that from a blockchain standpoint, one of the coolest things I think that blockchain has enabled people to do is with the level of encryption that it has, you can't, when you're talking about discernment, you can't fake the information from it. It is on a public blockchain that lasts forever, and a supercomputer can't solve that. And if it did, it would take too long for it to solve it to where people just move on. So you have this opportunity to actually see where exactly your product comes from, who was actually working on your product or with your product, who was the farmer, who was the person laboring on it, who do they work for, and you get to know all the subcontractors, that whole supply chain, because you can understand that whole picture. So like if you were to just go locally to a guy and say, "Hey, I want you to build a chair for me," you can trust that he's going to build that chair in his warehouse, and you're going to pick up that chair. But you don't know if he went to Home Depot to get that wood, which could have come from China. You don't know if he got a sustainably sourced wood, and
Or is he using a toxic glue, or is he whatever, right? The varnish, whatever.
ex- exactly. And almost what I've always been passionate about is we have nutrition labels for food which are actually really hard to read, because you grab something that's, you may be sensitive to gluten and you're looking for gluten-free products, but then you flip over the gluten-free label and it says gluten-free, but then it has 50 other things in it that make it taste good, that's gluten-free, and it's not necessarily going to be better for you.
I,
Yeah.
I have I see a future not too far down the road where we're gonna have scores, right? This is gonna have
Mm-hmm.
an environmental score. This is gonna have a health score, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know that the podcast I was listening to the other day, this MIT, kind of what's his, I forget what his practice is, but basically it's all about longevity. And he was saying that like there's a way now they're coming out with one of his companies that he created is coming out with a way to basically give you your metabolic score, saying like, okay, you might be 34 years old, but metabolically you're only 30 because you've been eating organically and exercising, right?
Wow.
Or like, dude, you smoke and eat cheeseburgers all day, you're 48 but you really are like 65, right? And that there's a way to take a test, like it's going to be just literally a saliva swab and like send it in. They're going to be like, dude, look, and here's the things that you should do to correct that, right? Because it's never too late. His whole point or thesis is that, and he's done it to himself, so he knows this is possible. He's actually aging backwards metabolically. So you could be, metabolic to 65, but only actually be 48. But start to work backwards and get back to where by the time you're 55, you're actually, metabolically 48. Like you can do that. And he's building recipes. There's a lot of like, molecular kind of stuff that's going on. Cocktails of antioxidants and things that they're doing. It's pretty radical science. But the point that I guess I'm getting after is I think that soon in our future as humanity, we're going to have like, or at least the United States, basic scores, like supply chain, like this thing has a environmental impact score or carbon, score of just, all we have to do is that a 34 and that one's a 28, or a health score on your food. I don't think that's possible again until we have truth. And the only way to secure truth is in blockchain. You look at LEED, right? LEED buildings, on average, which I'm not a huge LEED fan, but just as an example of like a rating, kind of certification, vehicle, LEED buildings are worth significantly more than non-LEED buildings. And LEED platinum is worth significantly more than LEED gold, right? It's just the way it is. And it's not just because they have the shiny plaque on the wall. It literally is a better freaking building, and it's a better building for people to work in. And some of what I don't like about LEED is that it's just, some of it is just pure cost with no return. So it's a little bit harder to do. It's basically only for people with money that they want to spend to do the right thing. It's not really all investment, to return, which is what we work on. So that's why I kind of like fundamentally oppose it a little bit. But some of it's cool. Like you can get LEED points because you have bike racks, where hey, you're incentivizing people to ride bikes. Like it's stuff like that, or you have a recycling program, things like that. But which I think are good, but they're not necessarily driving the mission in a way that I think is like what we're talking about as a company.
Because they may not be filling the bike racks. They may just be sitting there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Or that it just costs money. Like it's not really, there's no return. So you're basically telling people to get a good LEED score, you got to spend more money than normal.
I totally agree. I mean, I think that's the idea of transparency. It's give people the ability to make a choice that they think is going to be best for them, and just be open about it. And that to me, that's what true capitalism is. It's let people decide, and the market will decide which one is going to do better, if you will, than the other one.
Bashed by like 80% of the youth today for talking about free market capitalism, right? I don't think that, because there is a lot that can happen in a negative way where people are being, there is an inequality to it. To some extent, it can happen, right? And you got to be thoughtful around that. I think also that you end up in a place which has been problematic for us, which is profit over everything, and you see what happens in this government, corporate, industrial complex, where it's just it's driving the planet and people off a cliff. But what we're talking about, I think here, that I think we should really kind of caveat is that we're talking about freedom for choice of everyone, right? Which I think does create an equitable environment. You have freedom through information, right? If you actually are looking at the truth, you can make your decision. I think it does open the door for a new. I'm really a big fan of like this new version of potential capitalism that I think is coming around the corner, which is a social capitalism. And I think it's because of crypto and blockchain, because of transparency, like you've been talking about. I think that that's actually coming, and I'm really excited to see what that looks like. I'm not smart enough to actually project what that looks like, but I'm excited to see what happens.
Yeah, definitely. Me too. I mean, I think it's an exciting future on that end, and I think giving people the choice is just awesome. It gives the market a chance to kind of regulate itself, rather than, when you figure out that a holding company actually owns like 15 different companies, and they'll even bash each other's companies just to make marketing and get people to talk about it, but they're all winning at the end of the day.
Or that De Beers diamonds or whatever, you really can trace back what's actually happening in Africa, right? And now you don't, all of a sudden you're like, I'm not buying my wife, my fiance a diamond we're changing that paradigm. Fuck diamonds. We're not using diamonds for engagement rings anymore. You know what I mean? That's like, who cares? Like, we'll use something else. We've been bamboozled by corporate for a long time now. And it's not just corporate, it's it's the high finance, it's Wall Street, corporate, government, complex that exists, that's truly the empire that we don't ever get to see behind that curtain. Like, we just, as the average person, we have no idea what's really going on. And all we get as information is what we see on that freaking commercial or we see in that ad. That's how we're making our decisions. And so we're talking about freedom of information. That's the kind of new social capitalism that I'm looking for, where you can actually make a decision based in some level of understanding and truth that isn't mystified. And
well, I'll bring this back to a few last questions just because I know like we're running up on time. I don't know what your day is looking like, but do you remember your first consciously sustainable purchase that you made where you're like, this is a decision that I'm making to buy something because it's good for the planet?
Damn it, dude. I've listened to some of your podcasts and I heard you ask these questions and I didn't prepare. All right. Let me think if I can think quickly here. This is going to sound totally crazy, but this is what popped into my head. I was shopping for a new pair of sandals, flip-flops, and sitting right next to what I would normally buy was something that said, recycled, sustainable, or whatever it was. I mean, this is years ago, right? And it was just A and B choice for me right in front of me. And, at the time, the sandals, and I don't remember who the manufacturer was or the brand was, it was like, maybe 30% more. And I literally was like, screw this, dude. Like, it's time to start. And, and that was kind of a tipping point for me in recognizing, like, I built a company that was trying to drive a change in the biggest, dirtiest segment of our, of our country. But yet I wasn't making choices around even like, okay, so I have the privilege of paying a few bucks more for sandals, right? Like, I can do that. And yet I wasn't even thinking about it like from a proactive standpoint. It had to be right in my face, like sitting there staring at me, like, you're basically looking me in the eye going, you're an asshole if you don't buy, if you don't buy the recycled sustainable sandals. And from there, it took off for us, as a family. And I know that you've probably heard this a number of times, but from there it took off where it's like, we started making decisions around first, like, local above everything, recycled next, sustainable for sure, right? And like just going through that kind of analysis on what we're buying and where we're putting our, where are we voting? We're voting with our dollars. Which companies do we want to survive? Which companies do we want to see thrive? The old way, that's mass producing and probably using, really bad practices and probably not paying their employees enough, or the new way that's saying, hey, you're going to pay a few bucks more, but you're investing in the future for your kids. You're investing in a better world. And we started like as a family kind of, and we have those conversations with our kids now. We do a lot of upcycling with, handing off old clothes to families that we know have kids that can use those clothes again. We're trying to buy, when we buy new, trying to buy, either we actually like buying used, adding to that life cycle of anything. It's already there, right? I feel like there's a mistake being made around buying sustainable stuff in that you're going to throw away your old stuff and then just go buy sustainable and feel good about yourself. And I'm like, no, like part of it is how long can we take that thing that already exists and continue its life, So we're all about like buying stuff used and then selling stuff on the used market, so that there's really no life cycle, life and death. Like, it just keep that stuff moving. And then when we do buy new, we're buying things that last. I think it's super important to say, like, is that a quality item? Disposable is bullshit. Like, get off of that. Like, go buy the old school razor and like use that thing. Like, don't buy disposable, plastic cups. Buy a nice, metal or ceramic or whatever that's going to last. And, or if it isn't going to last, is it, ceramic's a good example of something that just goes right back in the ground. It's not a big deal, right? So anyway.
I love that you mentioned that in terms of buying something of quality too, because I think, it's very easy to get caught up in, just buy something sustainable and let me get rid of my stuff that I have that was made dirty but is still in fine condition to buy something brand new, and there's still that cost to it. So it's like, and if you're gonna buy something, make it last as long as possible. And I think that's such a valuable piece of information.
The other thing I'm kind of been spending a lot of time on, right? So one of the thoughts I had in the last couple of days was like, we got lucky enough to buy this building downtown Santa Cruz, and then fill it with a bunch of brand new, super cool office furniture for our staff, like really like high end, nice stuff. And I'm going back, like our conference table is this like big white conference table. And I've been like desperately wanting to go and get like a live edge redwood slab that's the conference table, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want that in there.
Yep. With the glass in the middle and the blue and the yeah.
And it made me realize, and what's cool is I can sell my current table into the used market. Like I know the company that'll buy it from me and go sell it to a startup that doesn't want to buy new furniture. It's a perfectly good, brand new, barely used table, right? But what it reminded me of is, dude, how much more valuable, we're talking about buying stuff that lasts, how much more valuable is the stuff that you buy that some guy, some gal made locally with their own hands in their own shop, like up the road with lumber that was milled like, 10 miles away. Like you, I think buying local is almost paramount, like locally made, because it kind of checks a lot of the other boxes. If you can focus on buying local. Now, we're lucky to live in a pretty rich environment here in Santa Cruz. You are in Boulder, same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody has that, but the idea is still the same. Like focus local, because local tends to be more sustainable. And even if it isn't a sustainable material, it traveled way less to get to you. That probably makes up for the fact that it's not. You can buy sustainable and it's from some far away from India. Well, add up all that cost to get it here, and maybe buying a not so sustainable item that was made here locally, it might be just as good. So I like to focus local more than anything, because I like pumping right back into my own. I want to put money in the pockets of the families that I know, and their friends and their families, and then on, right? So that's a big,
And
I think
that's
it's a key aspect.
and that's building a community. Like that's what community is all about. I think we've lost touch with our local community, and how powerful that is. So where would be? I think I know the answer to this question, but where would be the favorite place that you like to enjoy nature?
Well, geez, the simple answer probably is, well, I'll tell you for sure, the for sure answer. I dreamed my whole life of someday being able to own some acreage, and little did I know, I actually, started cultivating a dream, 15 years ago, about being up in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And, we have 11 acres up by the mystery spot, up Brant's 40 in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And it's like, 10 minutes to my office. But when you're up there, you're in the redwoods, and there's freaking wild turkeys running around, and there's, coyotes howling at night, and, all kinds, just, it's just bananas up there. Well, to develop a piece of property is crazy, right? So we have 11 acres. Most of it's totally unbuildable. And we have like 3 that are kind of like where our house is, and like kind of our front and backyard. But there's like a mountain, like you can climb right up this mountain and see across the bay. And it's, sided by redwood groves on either side. But it took a while for my wife to build her dream, which is this garden out in the yard. You just don't import soil, you don't till, you just replenish with cover crop and all that. And so she has that garden going out there. It's her baby, right? And so there's these 2 Adirondack chairs that sit out there with a table in between. And it's like probably 3 or 4 times a week that she and I just leave the kids in the house watching TV, whatever they're doing, and we just go sit out in that garden and look out over the property and the redwood trees, and the birds are chirping, and the wild turkeys walking by. Every once in a while, a deer shows up, and we just sit out there and just hardly talk at all. We just sit and enjoy each other's company. Sometimes she's gardening and I'm just watching, and and that to me has become one of my favorite places on earth, period. That being said, very close second is the Guanacaste coast of Costa Rica. We used to go down there a lot more than we do now. And we actually owned a house down there at one point, a little place called Playa Flamingo, just north of Tamarindo. And it's one of the most culturally rich places I've ever been. And it's obviously one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. And it's just, there's something about it. When I'm there, I just feel like I'm on another planet, another world. Forget about everything. It's just, you're really in the moment. That's second for sure.
Wow, that's incredible. And where your home's at, my grandparents were, they always lived off of Glen Canyon. So instead of a mystery spot, you just go left. And they were, about mile up.
Probably one of my favorite roads in the whole county.
Oh, it's the best. Oh, it's amazing.
Like the Redwood Canyon, and then you're up when you get up to that little bit, like more where it opens up. I mean, it's some of the coolest. That is one of the only other spots I think I'd live. Is right up there, like where you get to some of those like kind of ranch houses, like up on the top,
Yep.
where it opens up, like, oh, dude, I love it up there.
Yeah. how can people get in touch with Mynt, you learn more about what you guys do, get involved, have questions?
We just recently built a new website that I think is a little bit more informative than the original one was. And you can simply just go to mintsystems.com. The hard part of that is Mynt is spelled with a Y. So MYNTSYSTEMS.com. If you own or invest in commercial real estate, again, kind of going back to what was mentioned earlier in this podcast, you're currently in the energy game and you just don't know, may not know it yet. We can help with that. Everything you heard today is really a big part of how you can be not only improving your yield on your investment, but also doing the right thing for the planet and for your community. We love to partner with real estate developers, investors, owners, asset managers that are interested in that. We don't want to partner with everybody. It's got to be the right mindset. So if you've heard anything here today that makes sense for you, give us a look. Certainly you can hit us on the info, inbox at the that's on the website, or look us up on the web. Otherwise, so yeah, I mean, look, we really, really are passionate about what we do, and we really appreciate you doing a podcast like this and giving us the opportunity to talk about this. It's a sophisticated set of data and problems that are kind of all converging here, and so I think it takes, and this is what I love about podcasting, like I've already mentioned today, it takes a platform like this to be able to explain things because it's so nuanced. Like you'll go to our website, it's going to tell some of the story, but there's no way to tell the whole story. So thank you very much, Steve, for doing that for us. Like, we love being here. You're a fantastic host, by the way. Your questions
Thank you.
are definitely off. They're kind of like, there's the straight up, 12 o'clock kind of questions that you'd expect. And you're kind of pinging between like, 11 and 1, or 2, you're kind of taking us to just slightly different where it was kind of throwing me some curveballs. It's great. So, yeah. And by the way, anybody listening that wants to kind of, we also act as a consultant. We can act as an owner's rep. We can just kind of, we're happy at any point to help just talk. We don't need to be paid. We want to carry the message. We want to do good work. Ultimately, again, we're about proof of concept. We're trying to show the world what's possible, happen to be kind of in the right environment to make that happen, and that'll become more readily available worldwide. So if you just want to talk and ask some questions, we're here to help.
Nice. Thank you for the kind words, definitely. But also, thank you so much for just being a part of the show. It's been incredible to have you on it, talk about energy in such like a very, very deep way that I think a lot of people don't look at. I mean, what you guys are doing it's in a category and in an area that most people don't think about at all. But the impact that you guys are having already and the future impact that you guys are going to have I think it's going to be something that's experienced by every single person in their home, in their business, in their job. I mean, it's almost that, people didn't think Amazon was going to be something when they were just a bookstore, right? And it's like you guys are helping with some renovations of buildings, if you will, but you guys are doing so much more than that, the bigger picture of what you guys are doing. So thank you so much for all of this.
You bet, man. It's the transformation of commercial industrial real estate. That's the idea, right? To high performing energy assets. Like that's really what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
Thanks so much. I really had a great time. Appreciate it. And look forward to continue the discussions with you because you're a fascinating dude and I love to hear more about what you're up to. So thanks again for the time today. This was a ton of fun.
Thanks to Derek for being a part of this podcast. I know that we went deep into some of these concepts, but I love that we explored this idea of paradigm shifting. Derek and Mynt Systems is doing just that in a way that will have a massive impact on the way that we live our lives. All of the details will be in the show notes to reach out to Mynt and Derek, and to learn more, I highly suggest you research more about what Mynt does, look a little bit about Derek's story. He's an incredible founder, an all-around just genuine person. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. And thanks again for listening to this episode of Sustainable Goat.